I'd like to introduce John Roulac, who will be our first speaker. John is the founder and CEO of Nutiva, the world's leading organic superfoods brand of hemp, coconut, chia, and red palm superfoods. Founded in 1999 and dedicated to revolutionizing the way the world eats, Nutiva has been named one of Inc. magazine's fastest growing companies in America for 7 years in a row. A longtime advocate for healthy people and ecosystems, John has been a strong advocate for hemp farming since 1995. Please welcome John Roulac.
Good morning. It's great to be in Kentucky again. Over the last 20 years or so, I've been here a few times, and I think the first time was Woody planted some 4 hemp seeds, Woody Harrelson, and helped get things going. And I know people have been working a long time, and Kentucky holds a special place in the hemp industry with all the history. I like to say it's the heart of the hemp industry in the U.S. And so great to be here. Last time I was here was testifying at one of the hemp bills here a couple years ago. So now we've been talking about it for how long, Joe? 25 years. We've been talking about it, and now we're going to start. Now you guys are growing it. So that's hats on. It's been a lot of hard work, dedication. Sometimes good things take some hard work. So just going to give a little overview today, this morning, then I'll come back and talk a bit more. And so this is a great quote. The nation that destroys its soils destroys itself, from Franklin Roosevelt. And I think for too long we've just assumed that we're going to have healthy soils, and the soil is going to provide the food that we need. And we're losing a lot of soil all over the U.S. And you can history's littered with places that have not paid attention to their soils, like the Sahara forest in Africa. That used to be it was a forest. Now they call it the Sahara Desert. So we can see what's happened. Iraq and Iran. Iraq used to be a fertile valley, and we saw what's happened to that area when they destroyed their soils. So as mentioned, we specialize in organic superfoods, and hemp was our first one that we introduced in 1999, along with coconut, chia, and red palm. And our products are available in about 20,000 retail outlets across the world. We're pretty strong in the U.S. and Canada, but also in Asia and Europe. So I was digging through some slides, and I remember seeing this quote from 1994. Ed Logston, Kentucky's Commissioner of Agriculture, said, "It's time to look at producing hemp on a commercial basis." And Andy, I want to say, what took you so long? It's only been 21 years, right? So, but when I first learned about hemp in 1990, when I saw the Hemp for Victory, this interesting video. How many people have seen that video before? If you Google that, it was the USDA produced it. And the interest in Kentucky really helped kind of spark my interest to move forward on us, and to see that people were really pushing forward on this. So hemp can be America's next homegrown superfood. I mean, how many superfoods are we importing? There's acai from Brazil. There's coconut oil from Asia, but how about producing a superfood? And a superfood basically mean by like a nutrient-dense food that's not like iceberg lettuce or industrial tomatoes or something. Foods that are high in nutrition, and hemp's very high in nutrition in terms of protein, essential fatty acids that we don't get enough of, and also very rich in minerals, magnesium, zinc, and iron that are really important to our health. 90% of most Americans are short in magnesium, and hemp's one of the best sources of magnesium in the plant kingdom. So we have an opportunity to create a homegrown superfood that can feed people and create a market right here. It's a picture of me in one of our fields in Canada. And today, Nutiva goes through about 4.5 million pounds of organic hemp seeds, all sourced from Canada. So there's obviously a good-sized market here in the United States for that. So some little trends here on organic food sales. Expected to exceed $45 billion in 2015. You can see some of the growth here. And we say organic means grown without any synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. So we're seeing continuing growth, and you're seeing large companies such as Target and Kroger making major plays. Matter of fact, they're growing so much, they're putting pressure on some of the pioneer retailers such as Whole Foods, which has actually seen declining store sales of recently. They pioneered it partly because there's so much pressure from the Costco's and other stores. These other stores don't offer the selection like Whole Foods. And also, I'm going to talk a little about today is this is a picture in Paris, the soil story. And this is relatively new information for many people, and it was to me a year and a half ago, that there's a direct correlation between the health of the soil and climate change. How many people know about that connection? Yeah, and this is we're in Kentucky. This is a rural farming state. And so this is an event we sponsored, a art installation at the climate change in Paris, and David Bronner is also sponsored. He's definitely a great guy, and we've worked very closely together. When we had to sue the DEA in 2001, we were doing about 15,000 a month. I was selling, if I sold 15,000 hemp bars a month, I was doing good. So the idea is that we've produced all this excess carbon, we've had this carbon in the ground, and we've burned it and dissed it and tilled it, and all this is going up in the atmosphere, and then it starts falling into the oceans. The question is, what are we going to do with all the carbon in the atmosphere? And so we'll talk a little more about what we're going to do with some of that. And this is a great quote from Tom Newmark, a friend of mine. He has a project called the Carbon Underground Project. And there's a whole movement right now that's really kind of come onto the scene here about how the relationship between the carbon and soils, and we can take, here's a great quote talking about many NGOs view agriculture and carbon as the enemy. The regenerative agriculture movement sees carbon as our friend and agriculture as our natural ally to help carbon return to the land. And to this extent that we're successful at taking that carbon and putting it back into the soil, and carbon-rich soils hold water better, they're better in drought, they have more nutrients for the plants, and we really haven't paid much attention to that. And there's farmers and ranchers who've been able to take their carbon content from a couple percent to 4 or 5 or 6% in 5 to 10 years through different processes, and we'll be getting into that later about that. And the big question is, how do we monetize conventional farmers to use more regenerative practices? Using more cover crops and diversifying their crops. Because if you just grow corn or soybeans with Roundup Ready process and chemical fertilizers year after year after year after year after year, what's going to happen? Yeah.
Super resistant weeds, tons of weed seeds in your soil.
Exactly.
Compaction.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing across America, and we're really destroying the soils. And unfortunately, there's this little company called Monsanto that has just a little influence on agricultural policy in America, and is partly the reason why we're having so many problems around soil quality and nutrition and health, et cetera. So I'm going to give you a couple before the wrap up here. A couple quotes from some of the heroes. Henry Ford is one of them. Why use up the forests which were centuries in the making, and the mines which required ages to lay down, if we can get the equivalent of forest and mineral products in the annual growth of the fields? Henry Ford was part of this Chemergy movement. Chemergy is, not many people know about that, but there was a whole movement in the 1930s to basically do what he's talking about here, to take agricultural crops and turn it into materials, making cars, plastics, etc., papers. But unfortunately, the steel industry, the petrochemical industry, and the banking industry stopped that movement. And then after World War II, the whole thing kind of fell apart. But now we're trying to figure out how we can come back to that and rely on the farmer and use some of those agricultural materials to make products that we need. Here's another great American, George Washington Carver. This is a very interesting quote. I believe that the great Creator has put ores and oils on this earth to give us a breathing spell. As we exhaust them, we must be prepared to fall back on our farms, which is God's true storehouse and can never be exhausted. We can learn to synthesize material for every human need from things that grow. That's a pretty heavy quote there, huh? Yeah. So he forward, we're very close and worked on this. So, we're looking forward to the rest of the presentations today, and I'll get into a little more about regenerative agriculture and hemp, and talk a little about what's been going on in Canada. I know we got some excellent speakers as well coming up. And I'm also going to talk about the relationship between oceans and soil health and climate change. It's an area a lot of people aren't aware of. And if we don't pay more attention to what we're doing in the soil as a large ecosystem all over the world, we're going to continue to see declining health in the ocean. So we're going to talk about how carbon, which is falling into the oceans, is creating the oceans to become more acidic. And for whatever reason, the media and our universities are not talking about this information, but slowly more people are starting to become aware of it. And people like to say we live in an ocean planet, not a land planet. The majority of the surface of the planet is oceans. And so we need to pay attention to that ecosystem. So thank you again for Atalo Holdings for putting this on today. I look forward to hearing some of the presentation, meeting some of you, and come back and talk a little later. Thank you for your time this morning.